The Killer Brothers' Final Hours, brothers executed side by side. Dear friends, tonight we step back into Arizona in the early 1980s, where one of the most unusual and tragic cases in American criminal history unfolded. It is the story of two brothers, Walter and Carl, who grew up in brokenness, drifted into a life of crime, and ultimately became two of the very few siblings in use in history to be executed. Their journey from neglected children to condemned men, and the final hours they faced on death row, reveal not just the consequences of violence, but also the shadows of a past that shaped their fate. Walter was born in January 1962 in Germany, and Carl followed a year later in October 1963. They were half-brothers, sharing the same mother, Emma, but each having a different father. Their childhood was marked by hardship before it even had a chance to bloom. For a time, they lived in an orphanage, placed there when their mother could not manage. In 1967, Emma married an American soldier, Macy, who adopted all three of her children and moved them to the United States. What might have been a fresh start quickly turned sour. The household was full of tension, fights between their mother and stepfather, and harsh punishments that left scars deeper than the skin, adding to their misery. Walter and Carl struggled with identity and belonging. Of mixed ethnic backgrounds, they were often singled out, bullied, and mocked. To escape the chaos at home, they began running away. Ironically, the institutions and juvenile centers where they ended up often gave them more stability than the house they were supposed to call home. By the age of 9, Carl had already drawn the attention of authorities, stealing money from a store and later being caught for taking shoes. Walter wasn't far behind, and soon both were entangled in petty crimes that escalated as they got older. On a military base in Texas, they set fire to a golf course, causing thousands of dollars in damages. By 16, both boys had dropped out of school and drifted fully into the orbit of crime. In June 1980, their patterns caught up with them. Both brothers were arrested for a series of robberies. Carl, still underage, was sent to juvenile detention, while Walter went to state prison, when both were released in late 1981. It was only a matter of weeks before they were arrested again, this time outside a grocery store in Tucson, facing charges of robbery, kidnapping, and assault. Walter was denied bail because of his probation status. Yet, through a series of legal maneuvers, by January 1982 he was back on the streets, reunited with Carl. Within 48 hours, they would make the decision that sealed their fate. On the morning of January 7, 1982, they targeted the Valley National Bank in Morirana, a quiet town northwest of Tucson. That morning, the branch manager, 63-year-old Kenneth Hartsock, arrived as he always did, parking his car in a precise spot to signal employees it was safe to enter. Kenneth was a respected figure in the community, a husband and father who had built his career on integrity and kindness. Walter and Carl intercepted him and forced him back into the bank. The brothers demanded that Kenneth open the vault, but security measures meant he could not do it alone. He held only half the code. The other half belonged to the security guard, who had not yet arrived. Moments later, 20-year-old Dawn Lopez, a new employee who had just started working at the bank, walked in. She was immediately confronted, bound, and gagged, terrified as the men threatened her life repeatedly. The robbery quickly unraveled. Kenneth tried to calm Dawn, telling her the men only wanted money, but the brothers grew more desperate as time passed. A phone call from another employee, Wilmer Rogers, raised suspicions when he noticed Kenneth's car was parked strangely. Dawn was forced to answer, trying to conceal the truth. But the contradiction of her words only confirmed to Wilmer that something was wrong. He called the police. Inside the bank, the situation turned violent. Kenneth and the brothers struggled, and then Dawn was attacked as well. Both victims were stabbed repeatedly. Kenneth suffered 24 wounds and died on the floor of his office. Dawn was stabbed 14 times. But against all odds, she managed to break free and crawl to a phone. Her desperate call to 911 telling dispatchers that Kenneth was dead and begging for help preserved a record of her bravery and the horror she endured. The brothers fled, but left behind a trail of evidence. Witnesses recorded the license plate of their car. Fingerprints were found inside the bank. Later, A briefcase filled with incriminating items, including blood-stained clothing and a letter opener, was recovered. That same day, Walter and Carl were arrested. Their trial would take years to unfold. In 1984, both brothers faced a mountain of evidence. Dawn Lopez testified with remarkable composure, identifying Walter as one of her attackers and recounting the terror of that morning. The defense tried to cast doubt, arguing about details of her vision, the glasses she wore, the fleeting moments of the attack, but the core of her story never wavered. Carl had confessed shortly after the crime, though under controversial circumstances while in a hospital and sedated. His attorney fought to exclude that confession, and eventually it was thrown out. Still, the weight of the physical evidence and Dawn's testimony proved overwhelming. The jury deliberated for just an hour before finding both brothers guilty of first-degree murder, attempted murder, kidnapping, and robbery. The sentencing was swift and severe. Prosecutors argued that the crime met multiple aggravating factors: prior criminal history, financial motive, cruelty, and the threat posed to Dawn. In December 1984, both Walter and Carl were sentenced to die in the gas chamber. Their appeals stretched on for more than a decade, but the Arizona Supreme Court, and eventually the U.S. Supreme Court, upheld their sentences. As their execution dates drew closer in the late 1990s, international attention mounted. Both men were still German citizens, and Germany had abolished the death penalty in 1987. German officials appealed directly to President Clinton and other U.S. leaders, urging clemency on the grounds of principle, not innocence. Amnesty International added its voice, warning against what it called cruel punishment. But the family of Kenneth Hartsock, especially his son, stood firm. They believed justice had to be served, and that the executions should proceed. In February 1999, Carl, then 36, was executed by lethal injection. Though he had initially chosen the gas chamber, at the last moment he changed his method, fearing the agony of suffocation. His final words were apologies directed to the Hartsock family and to Dawn, acknowledging the pain he caused and asking for forgiveness. A week later, on March 3, 1999, Walter faced his own execution. He did not change his method. Determined to make a statement, he entered the gas chamber, hoping that his suffering would highlight what he saw as the cruelty of capital punishment. Witnesses described the death as agonizing, with Walter coughing, writhing, and struggling for up to 15 minutes before his body finally went still. His last words, like his brothers, were apologies and effort to leave behind contrition, even as his life ended. Dear friends, the story of Walter and Carl is a dark tale of two brothers who chose violence and paid the ultimate price. From their fractured childhood to their final hours in the execution chamber, their lives stand as a warning of how broken beginnings can spiral into destruction. For the family of Kenneth Hartsock, no sentence could truly erase the pain of that morning in 1982. Yet the executions brought a final chapter to a case that had haunted Arizona for nearly 2 decades.